everyone, and welcome to Sidereal Insights Astro Update for December 28th, 2020, take two, because the first time there was no volume, and I'm not sure exactly what was going on with that. Give me just one moment while I get some windows situated properly here. Thank you for joining me. If you're joining me live this time, it's good to have you on. I'm going to make sure that I'm recording because that was the other piece of the puzzle that I did not have in place the first time we broadcast this. I did not record the live video. So, not that that would have mattered because there was no sound natively on my end in the streaming software. So, we're going to do this all over again. Welcome back to the broadcast. Hopefully, you can hear me and see me okay this time. Let's see. It looks like we are streaming just fine on YouTube. We are streaming just fine on Facebook. And all right, I think we're good to go. All right, I'm gonna get my notes in front of me here. Bear with me. And we'll dive right in, do this again. So welcome to Sidereal Insights. So every 2 weeks on the broadcast, we explore the astrology of the current planetary transits across the heavens from a Western sidereal perspective. I'm Phaedra, of course. For those of you who are new to the broadcast, I'm the astrologer and artist of Mystick, Physick Astrology, and I use Western sidereal astrology in my practice, a little bit different than what you might be accustomed to. And the idea is I like to help you reconnect with your soul purpose and remember why it is you came into this life to begin with. If you need to look up your sidereal sign placements, there is an easy online calculator at mystickphysick.com that you can use to find out absolutely free. Mostly with these broadcasts, we're concerned about your sidereal rising sign and your sidereal sun sign. However, sometimes we're looking at particular houses or particular points in a chart, and it's helpful sometimes to have your chart in front of you when we're doing that. But my aim really with these broadcasts is to offer you guidance on how you can consciously use the energy of the transits to kind of live them out in a positive way, being proactive and constructive rather than reactive or destructive. And so I want to thank you for joining me on the broadcast today, even though this is the second time that we're having to broadcast it. I want to invite you to please like and share the broadcast. If you know someone who might be interested in what we're going to be talking about today, you can also follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Mystick Physick Astrology. Welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about recent transit activity a little more in depth than we might normally talk about our recent transit activity on a broadcast. We're going to be talking about the coming full moon in Gemini. There's a lot around this to kind of chew on and digest, especially in looking at it through the lens of Mars having moved into his home sign of Aries and the condition of many of our other planets as they transit certain signs astrologically right now. And we're going to be talking about a more kind of in general look at the upcoming January transits, a little more in general than normal. Typically, I would get kind of specific on some of the important transits coming up in the next couple of weeks. There's a lot going on in January. And so we're going to kind of take a zoomed out look just to kind of frame the coming month for you so that you can kind of understand how to digest the astrology as it comes into play, as we pass through these transits, okay? And some of this I don't have in my notes, and we're going to be doing it kind of off the cuff, and hopefully I'll catch everything that I talked about the second time through that I talked about the first time through, since there was no recording and no volume, and I apologize for that. I'm going to check before we dive in on the health of our streams, because we're streaming on YouTube and we are streaming on Facebook, both live. Okay, I think we're in good shape. All right, so here's my notes right in front of me. Let's dive in and tackle this. First, what I want to do is kind of recap where we're at right now. I want to review some of the more recent transits that we have had in these past few weeks coming through the end of 2020. Quite specifically, I want to talk about the Great Conjunction because this is only a once every 20-year type of event, and this particular conjunction is really very almost once in a lifetime is what I would like to say. And I think it bears review as we move into 2021. But to kind of recap where we're at right now, we are at a place where the only planet left retrograde in our solar system is Uranus, right? This is pretty typical, at least in the last many, many years as these things have played out, that we end up with all the planets in direct motion except for retrograde. He's kind of lagging behind, excuse me, except for Uranus, he's kind of lagging behind in his retrograde. And then usually just after the beginning of the year, Uranus stations direct, and that opens up a window of a month and a half to 2.5 months sometimes, where we have all of our planets in direct motion. And that is typically our window of opportunity as we move into a new year to make our major initiations, to really launch our main primary full agenda for the coming year. Now, this year that plays out a little bit differently. And it's because we need to be thinking about Mercury's first retrograde of 2021. And I know we just came out of a Mercury retrograde. He's stationed direct on November 3rd, so just last month. But it's not too early, given that this is the transition point from one year to the next, when we might be doing our planning phase, or might be getting things ready to kind of hit the ground running, moving into a new year. So what happens in 2021 is that just as Uranus, I can't talk today, sorry y'all. Just as Uranus stations direct, Mercury is going to enter the shadow of his first retrograde of the coming year. He'll be retrograde beginning January 30th through February 21st. And the shadow period, as we all know, is the time when we want to be wrapping up Mercury-related activity, not thinking about entering into new initiations around Mercury-related activity. And so I want to start with that caveat in mind. That postpones our window of opportunity where we have all of the planets in direct motion in 2021 until the second half of February, because Mercury doesn't station direct until the 21st. Then, of course, we have his end retrograde shadow period while he's kind of getting back up to speed. But once that happens, once we come out the end of February, that'll open up really the best part of this 1.5 month long period, where we will finally have all of the planets in direct motion. And we will have 2 solid new moon opportunities in that window to make initiations. The first, of course, at the new moon in Aquarius on March 13th. The second will be at the new moon in Pisces on April 11th. And then come late April, April 27th to be exact, we'll have Pluto station retrograde, and he'll be the first of the outer planets to kick off our mid-year retrograde season in 2021. So this is kind of what we're looking at as we move into the early months, the early stages of 2021. And that's kind of what I want you to be keeping in mind as you're doing your planning, as you're deciding what's important to you in the coming year. What is it you want to accomplish? What are your major goals? What main initiations are you wanting to take action toward? That's your window. We'll look at the astrology of those new moons in a little more depth as we get closer to them. But that way you kind of understand what the schedule looks like as we move into early 2021. Okay. Now, to kind of zoom out and set the stage for today's conversation, we have Mercury currently in Sagittarius. He went into Sagittarius on the 17th of December, right? And Mercury is not well placed in Sagittarius. So the trouble here is that Mercury is both in fall and in detriment. We're going to talk about both of those a little bit more specifically, especially as it relates to the full moon in Gemini coming up here in just a day or two, depending on where you're at in the world. Now, Mercury in Sagittarius, this can speak to a proliferation of things like conspiracy theories and misinformation, susceptibility to misinformation, propaganda, or susceptibility to propaganda. It indicates a tendency to overthink or to not think things through as well as we could. And so what I want to encourage you to do is, while Mercury's in Sagittarius, employ Occam's razor. This is your best friend. Okay. Use Occam's razor as Mercury is in Sagittarius, because otherwise we can be prone to a tendency to get lost in the weeds of details and lose focus on the big picture, overcomplicate things, overanalyze things, or not think them through enough, not use our logical abilities, not use our rational thinking potential. Okay, when we might potentially mistake our own ideas and our own thoughts for the capital T truth. Okay, so a big caveat around that as a warning: we're all susceptible to this when Mercury is in Sagittarius. Okay, now we also have Venus in Scorpio right now. Venus, of course, is in detriment in Scorpio, so this is not a good placement for her. This began December 11th and will continue through January 3rd, so not too many more days of Venus in her detriment. January 3rd, she's going to move into Sidereal Sagittarius. And what I want to call out here is that we might be tempted to, but shouldn't, so don't do this if this is you, we might be tempted to manipulate within interpersonal relationships, manipulate partners, manipulate lovers, manipulate in business situations. And we're tempted to do this for our own gain, for our own benefit, for our own profit, and in pursuit of what we want. And it's important to keep in mind that a relational exchange is about both parties, right? And so this quite literally can also work to our detriment when we're behaving selfishly within a relationship situation, or when we're putting our own needs, wants, and desires ahead of our partner, because relationships are about give and take, regardless of what kind of relationship we're talking about. They're about give and take. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move on into the broadcast as well. But I would encourage you, don't be tempted to manipulate others within interpersonal relationships, because it could very well backfire. Just avoid that, and also just be wary of the tendency, if you're in a partnership of any kind or relationship of any kind, for your partner to maybe do that to you. Okay, but we can be suspicious. Scorpio is a very suspicious kind of sign. It's a very suspicious kind of energy. So just be aware of that. Venus transiting Scorpio can evoke that nature within our interpersonal relationships. Okay. We have Mars just having entered Aries on the 26th of December. And of course, Mars rules Aries. He's at home there. Now, this is good. This is beneficial energy. And typically, Mars transiting a sign is about a 6 to 7 week long transit. So we have some time to take advantage of this. But Mars in Aries is really about taking decisive action towards your objectives, or towards the objectives of a higher authority with whom you align. Okay, now the objectives of this authority, what I mean here is that they either align with your objectives, or they support the manifestation of your personal objectives, right? So this is about acting with intention. This is about giving birth to what you desire to see in the world, putting the focus on your own needs and wants, in the same sense that you need to put on your own oxygen mask before you help someone else with theirs, right? You need to make sure your cup is filled before you pour from it, because you cannot pour from an empty cup. So when we talk about putting your desires, your needs, and your wants first in this sense of Mars in Aries, it's not in a selfish way. It's about positioning yourself to make sure that those needs are met, so that you are better positioned to help meet the needs of others around you, potentially. Okay. Now, there's some interesting future astrology coming to pass with this that I want to bring up, and that is related to a conversation that we need to have about January in general. And that is that Mars will be approaching a square to Saturn on January 13th, and then a square to Jupiter on January 23rd. And why this is important is because these are the opening squares of a brand new cycle. So let's kind of maybe back up a little bit and talk about January from the big picture perspective. And that is that January is going to play out as a month of transitions. And it's going to do this because January is absolutely loaded with conjunction activity. And it's not often that we would see one single month of the year so full of conjunction activity. But what's important to keep in mind, and why this is relevant to our conversation, is that conjunctions are the ending and the beginning of a cycle, in the sense that in astrology, we're talking about circular motion in the heavens around a singular point, which is planet Earth, right? And this harkens back to the age-old dispute between tropical astrologers and even sidereal astrologers, in the sense that how do you define the beginning of a circle? You really, really can't. Well, when we talk about astrological cycles, we can, and that is that you define them by the conjunction. The conjunction is the beginning point of a cycle. It's the ending point of a cycle. It's a transition stage between two cycles. And the cycles that we're talking about here in January, in terms of these conjunctions, are in many cases cycles that are going to unfold over the coming year. So not super short-term cycles like we might be talking about when we're talking about new moon cycles, where the sun and moon are conjunct, and then 30 days later they're conjunct again, and that's a short-term 30-day cycle. These are longer-term cycles, a year, or in some cases even longer. Okay, like our conjunction that we just had, the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, that's a 20-year long cycle. Okay, so knowing that the conjunction sets off the beginning of a new cycle and signifies the ending of a past cycle, how that relates to Mars's activity and his transit going into Aries is that he forms those first two squares to Saturn and Jupiter. Those are the opening squares of that cycle, reflected back to the conjunctions of Mars with Saturn and Mars with Jupiter that we experienced earlier in 2020. And so this is going to involve a little bit of recall on your part. I don't have those dates in front of me, but I can circle back around and add them to the comments after the broadcast is over. But you're going to want to think back to those conjunctions in 2020 and kind of see if you can get a sense as to what events or themes the new cycle is bringing up for you, because these coming squares as we move into January will signify the first tests that you'll face related to this new cycle. And where that's important is that the coming square to Saturn really is going to require that whatever those Mars and Aries objectives are, in terms of giving birth to what you desire, in terms of taking action towards your own objectives, and focusing on your own needs and wants, that opening square of Mars to Saturn is going to force it into your awareness that those objectives need to be focused on the long term. This is Saturn's requirement. Those need to be long-term objectives around building or rebuilding solid structures from firm and stable foundations, rather than objectives that are built on short-term satisfaction. Okay? And this is why it's important. So these first tests are going to be highlighting for you whether you're on the right path and whether you're building from solid ground or shaky ground. And our coming full moon in Gemini is going to highlight that same thing in a slightly different way. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. I want to call out for you that Mars in Aries is a time to be assertive. Notice I didn't say aggressive. Aggressive is more of a kind of a toxic expression. Oh, Dylan, I'm late too. This is the second round of this broadcast because I had no audio the first go round, and I'm not sure what caused that. I did a test recording on my laptop using the streaming software, and there was no audio even on the recording. So welcome to the late party. We're all late here. So this is the test of, are you on the right path? Are you building from solid versus shaky ground? And be assertive and not aggressive. So as I was saying, aggressive is really the more toxic expression of Mars, right? Aggressive is not necessarily healthy. Assertive is healthy. Okay, so step into assertiveness. Try not to be aggressive. Okay. Now, we also just had Jupiter re-enter Capricorn in late November on the 25th. That is going to last until April 2021. So we have a little over 3 more months of that. He'll be until early April. And the Ingress chart for this transit spoke of profound transformation and metamorphosis. And so we have a little over 3 more months where we can really step into how we use that opportunity for profound transformation and metamorphosis. I want to encourage you to aim for results. Don't be satisfied with appearances or perceptions. Understand that perceptions can be misleading. They can be manipulated. Okay? So throw your perceptions out the window. Focus on results. Start with dialogue. Move towards truth. Okay? Now remember, Jupiter is in fall in Capricorn, so he's not super well placed. This can be potentially greediness, stinginess, not wanting to share with others, hogging the limelight, right? Give credit where credit's due. If you have other people who've helped contribute to your success or to your positive outcomes, to your results, acknowledge those folks, right? Don't try to hog the limelight. Let's see. Dylan says, I'm going to expand my window here. Yes, same baseline it is. Exactly the same baseline. I'm glad you're here too, Dylan. That's great to see you on live. And it's great to know that y'all can hear me this time around. One of the hazards of doing live broadcasting, sometimes you don't have everything all working well from the get-go, and boy, does that throw a monkey wrench in things. So we also have Saturn in Capricorn right now, right? This is why we just had our great conjunction, and he's been in Capricorn since January 31st of 2020. He's going to be there until late January 2023. So we still have 2 more solid years of Saturn in Capricorn to contend with. But Saturn rules Capricorn, so in a way, this is a good thing. It's a helpful thing. What I want to highlight, though, is that this is going to be a challenging transit for folks with Capricorn Sun or Capricorn Rising. Anytime Saturn transits a sign, it's challenging for folks who have Sun or Rising sign in that sign. And for all the rest of us, we can expect to be tested in the area of life that sign aligns with in terms of the houses in our sidereal natal chart. So have a look at where Capricorn lands in your sidereal natal chart and know that these coming 2 years, we'll be feeling the rest of that test. And now what Saturn is doing is he's testing for weakness. He's testing for shaky foundations. He's testing for faults and fault lines. And where there's weakness, the good news is that while he's here, you have the opportunity to shore up that weakness, right? To strengthen things, to strengthen the underlying structure. But if you're not doing that, or if there's not a way to do that, if the faults just go straight through to the core, he'll break whatever he's testing while he's transiting this sign. And so you just need to be aware of that. And then also be aware that Saturn transiting a house or a sign is an opportunity to redouble your efforts to make sure that you're meeting your commitments, that you are taking care of your responsibilities in that house to the best of your ability. Saturn, that's what he's really asking of us, is maturity. And anytime he's transiting a house, it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate that maturity and make sure that we meet our commitments in that house, in that area of life. Okay. We had Neptune also stationed direct in late November on the 29th. Now, I'm circling back around to this conversation because in 2020, Neptune stations landed lockstep with eclipse season. When he first stationed retrograde and then when he stationed direct, it landed in line with our November 30th. I believe it was a full moon lunar eclipse in Taurus that we had going on at that point in time. Now, Neptune retrogrades, and especially his stations at the beginning and the end of the retrograde, these tend to expose secrets, lies, deceptions, decay, rot, anything that's rotten underneath the surface. Neptune's going to expose that. And of course, eclipses already have a tendency to expose secrets or hidden information, things that we're not aware of but maybe need to be aware of. And so with Neptune stationing with the eclipses, it just kind of underscores that. And why that's relevant now is because we just had these two eclipses, our last one being 2 weeks ago at the solar eclipse in Scorpio when we had our new moon. The eclipses aren't over. The eclipse season isn't over. Eclipse season has an effect for up to 60 days before and after the eclipses take place. So we're still feeling the late 2020 eclipse season, and we'll continue to feel it through mid-February. And so the reason why I want to underscore this issue with Neptune stationing direct and then retrograde and then direct in line with the eclipses is that for some of us, as we move through now until mid-February, we could still see this Neptune station direct effect related to the November eclipse. We could still see it play out. Okay. Now, speaking of those eclipses we just had, eclipse season continues through mid-February, and that's important to keep in mind. And so if you haven't yet, I would encourage you go back and watch my broadcast on the November and December 2020 eclipse season, critical dates and degrees that you need to know. That's going to give you an in-depth look into that late 2020 eclipse season, the critical dates that you want to be aware of during eclipse season proper, but also coming through the next 12 months. That's relevant if you find that you have a personal planet or point that is activated by either of these two eclipses. In that case, you could continue to feel the effects of these eclipses unfold over the coming year. And you're going to want to know what dates to keep an eye on. So it may be worthwhile to circle back around and watch that video if you missed it. Okay. And then finally, I want to talk about the Great Conjunction. This, of course, took place on December 21st. It was an astronomical and astrological event that many of us have been looking forward to pretty much all year long. And this is typically a once every 20 years type of conjunction. The Great Conjunction, of course, always refers to the conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn. This year it took place on the solstice, right? Which is the shortest day and longest night of the year, and a marker of the changing seasons, right? That happened in Sidereal Capricorn. And what the Great Conjunction does is augur in a new 20-year paradigm. In this case, in your Capricorn house. And so you would want to be looking at 5 or 6 degrees of Sidereal Capricorn. Look at where that hits in your chart. Does it touch off any of your personal planets, any of your points, especially the angles, right? We're looking at the ascendant and descendant, the midheaven and imum coli axes. And if that's the case, then you can expect this new 20-year cycle to be extremely important for you, especially in terms of the area of life described by the house Capricorn falls into in your sidereal natal chart. Now, one further point that I want to talk about in relation to this particular Great Conjunction and why it was so special is that these two planets were also conjunct by right ascension or by declination. Okay, now conjunct by declination is what we call a parallel aspect, and a parallel aspect in astrology functions much like a conjunction. And so this conjunction energy that we experienced was augmented twofold. It's really intensified and magnified, and that is significant. That's really the kind of once in a lifetime type of quality that this particular Great Conjunction carried for us. And so what I want to call out is that it may also be worthwhile for you to go back and check your natal chart or even your progressed chart and look to see if you have personal planets or points at 302 degrees 46 minutes of right ascension or 20 degrees 27 minutes of declination, either north or south. Now this conjunction took place at 20 degrees 27 minutes south declination. I just want to make sure that I'm giving that to you correctly. Yes. And so if you have any personal planets or points at that degree of south declination, that augments that intensity and therefore the relevance for you, depending on what it is you have at that declination, right? And then if you have personal planets or points at 20 degrees 27 minutes north declination, that forms what we would call a contraparallel aspect, and a contraparallel aspect functions more like an opposition. Okay, so these are also relevant and important, and I would encourage you to go double check your chart and look for potential contacts that might be hitting you in those ways. Now, one other thing that I want to call out, and so maybe this is a good thing that we didn't have audio on the first attempt at this broadcast. So when you have an eclipse, right? So here's an interesting thing. This great conjunction, this was an explanation I gave to someone in another astrology Facebook group. Someone had a question about this particular great conjunction and why it's so different and why it's so special. So every month at the new moon, we have a conjunction between the sun and the moon, right? But it's only a couple of times a year that we have an eclipse. And the eclipse is a good illustration of what it means for two planetary bodies to be conjunct not only by longitude, but also by declination. Now, what happens when you have one body conjoining another body at the same degree of declination? It forms basically what we call an occultation, where the body that's closest to the earth occults, obscures, hides. These are the definitions that inform the word occult. They hide the body behind, right? And so the way this was explained to me astrologically, if we're looking at it from the terms of an eclipse, is that it's like flipping off a light switch and then flipping it back on again, right? So for a brief moment, that energy from the planet that is behind the other, for a brief moment, that energy is eclipsed out, it's shut off, it's breaks the stream, I guess you could say. And so in that sense, we experience the same thing during this great conjunction. The difference is that we experienced it between Jupiter and Saturn rather than the sun or the moon. Okay? Uh-oh, I just clicked something. Hopefully I didn't mess up any Facebook broadcasting. Dylan, if you're still with me, please let me know. I was trying to move a window out of the way so that I could see better on my notes, and I clicked something weird here. So this is important in the sense that Jupiter, being the great benefic, right, although in fall in Capricorn, has temporarily interrupted Saturn's ability to restrict us, to create obstacles, to hold us back. But then as he passes on, Saturn's ability to do that comes back, right? You could almost, in a way, associate this with the Vedic concept of planetary war, right? So Jupiter comes out the winner eventually in the planetary war. And I wonder if in part, maybe he's more able to do that because he is closer to us than Saturn, astrologically speaking and astronomically speaking. So, but as I was saying, check your natal charts, check your progressed charts for personal planets or points at 5 or 6 degrees of Capricorn, but also at 20 or 21 degrees of declination, north or south, because anything you have there will be activated by that conjunction. And that's a 20-year cycle, unlike some of these conjunctions that we're experiencing as we move into January. Okay. Now, Capricorn, of course, is the administrator of the zodiac. And with the great conjunction, we had our midheaven in Aquarius. We had Uranus trining the sun and sextiling the ascendant. And this speaks to egalitarian and humanitarian ideas. And it also kind of speaks to the potential for an achievement unlocked once Uranus stations direct in mid-January. So watch January 14th and the events that take place around that and see if that doesn't indeed become the case for you, that you unlock an achievement potentially, especially if you see that you have direct contact, especially direct personal contact with this conjunction. Okay. We also have the ascendant in Gemini for this conjunction. Mercury, of course, being in Sagittarius, he is not well placed in Sagittarius. But Mercury in Sagittarius speaks to exploring and implementing new ideas. Okay. We also had Mars conjunct the Arabic part of radical change, and this circles back around to the midheaven in Aquarius and the fact that Uranus was trining the sun and sextile the ascendant of our conjunction chart. This is about radical ideas, radical thinking, and radical behavior. Okay. Now, Mars is going to square that point from Aries exact on January 7th. Quite notably, the day after the new Congress is seated here in the United States. Okay, so this really speaks towards taking action towards new foundations that benefit the greater populace rather than just special interests. Radical change, radical thinking, radical ideas, and implementing them. Okay. Now, the day after we had that conjunction, we had Mars square Pluto, the third and final Mars square Pluto of that cycle. Well, not the third and final of the retrograde cycle, but that's an opening square. So we're going to continue to feel that cycle play out as well. And this Mars square Pluto energy is very much a destroy and rebuild type of energy, especially with the great conjunction in play. Pluto disposits Jupiter in Sagittarius, and Saturn is in his rulership. So this is definitely about destroying foundations, destroying structures, rebuilding from a new, more solid foundation, and rebuilding a stronger structure. Okay, so where in your life you're concerned with foundation and structures, this is your opportunity to be building and rebuilding from a more solid place. Okay, now coming up, we have our full moon in Gemini. December 29th or 30th, depending on where you are in the world. Mercury's in fall. He's debilitated and he's out of bounds. Mercury ruling our full moon. Now, what this speaks to is when we look at the chart as a whole, a risk of deception from a partner, a risk of disappointment around a partnership matter, and the full moon can bring that to a head. For this full moon, we have a Venus square Neptune aspect also taking place. Let me find my full moon chart. Here it is. I have two of them. One from New York time and one from Greenwich time. I don't know where my Greenwich one is. It's wandered off my desk here. And we also have Venus approaching conjunct the South Node. And all of this kind of feeds into our experience of this full moon. So there's this risk of deception from a partner, of disappointment around a partnership matter. With Mercury being in Sagittarius, this can speak to our potential for being misled, for believing the hype, believing the propaganda, right? So just be careful about that. The full moon could really exacerbate that, and it could touch off or trigger issues related to that. A full moon in Sagittarius, or excuse me, a full moon in Gemini is really very much about the stories that we tell anyway. And it's even more so about that with Mercury being out of bounds. I'm not going to get too much into what out of bounds travel is. I've touched on that in some past broadcasts when we've experienced it. But what I want to get into is how this plays out when we're talking about Mercury. Specifically, Mercury out of bounds can lead us to become very attached and obsessed with stories and narratives. Now, that can be a movie, it could be a novel, or it can be the stories and narratives that we tell in our own mind about our own life. It can cause us to misconstrue what people say to us in conversation, in dialogue, and then completely overreact based on what we think they're trying to say. Okay? So I would caution you about doing that. Just be aware that there's a tendency in ourselves and in others for these things to happen. It's important to be aware of. And so this full moon is really about opening our eyes to the stories that we're telling ourselves about our own lives, about our own experiences, about the people in our lives, and whether or not, which typically not, those stories are serving us. It's about coming to recognize the narrative and how we're so obsessively attached to this given narrative that we've been telling. And so I would invite you to ask yourself at this full moon, where do you keep retelling or reliving the same story over and over again on repeat, but not doing something differently or making a change to bring about a different end? Because you can't expect a different end unless you're willing to make a change. Okay? And so you can see how this kind of dynamic can not only work out to your detriment, but also quite literally bring about your downfall. Okay? So I want to invite you to get out of your own way, figure out where it is you've been obsessively telling the same story over and over again on repeat. Figure out where you've been attached to a given narrative about your life and about your experience. And ask yourself, what will it take for you to choose a different path going forward, a path that leads you to a more empowered and fulfilling ending? And what I think is a good illustration of this dynamic and the opportunity that it holds is in those choose your own adventure stories, where depending on which choice you make at the end of a chapter, that leads you down a different potential path. And each different potential path you choose can lead you to a different ending in the story. And if you keep finding yourself face to face with the same type of outcome, the same type of disappointment, the same ending to your story, back up, retrace your steps, figure out where it is you went wrong, and choose a different path. Choose a different approach. Choose to tell your story differently, and see if it doesn't take you to a new outcome, a new ending, one that's more reflective of the outcome and the ending that you were really hoping for. Okay? So this is really, it's a yucky new moon in the sense that Mercury is in piss poor condition, but it's really a heck of an opportunity to come face to face with where we're living out our patterns on repeat and finding ways to invoke a new pattern. Okay? So get out of your own way. Quit being your own obstacle, your own roadblock. Quit being your own diversion. Okay? Now, coming up in January, we have several back-to-back astrological events affecting Venus and affecting Mercury. And I don't have a lot of detail on these for you because I didn't have time to go through all of those charts specifically and in depth to give you that information, but there are some that I want to talk about specifically. And what I want to call out especially is that For those of you who have, as regards to Venus, Libra or Taurus sun or rising, know that you're going to feel those. And that is, we have the Venus square Neptune that arrives kind of in lockstep with our full moon in Gemini. On January 3rd, we have Venus shifting into Sagittarius, which is going to kind of bring a little bit of welcome relief from this Venus and Scorpio energy. And then we're going to have Venus conjoining the South Node. Okay. That invites you to check your motivations, to ask yourself whether you have outgrown a relationship somewhere in your life, a long-term relationship. It can be a love relationship, but any long-term relationship. It could be a business partnership or a business relationship of some kind. Check your motivations. And this is an opportunity to move into a space where you could be confident that you're being motivated by unconditional love. This is the examination that is asking you to take place. Are you being motivated by unconditional love and not by people pleasing or approval seeking? And what I want to call out here is for you to remember that unconditional love is not about being a doormat. It's not about loving people even in their bad behavior. Yes, of course, you're still going to love them, right? But that doesn't mean you have to allow those people with whom you are in long-term relationships to walk all over you, right? You have to love yourself as well. And you can love people unconditionally from a distance. You can love people unconditionally and still hold boundaries that protect you and honor you, right? Genuine partnership requires, in fact, it almost demands mutuality and not one-sidedness, right? True compromise includes mutual benefit and mutual sacrifice. It's win-win, not tit for tat, right? So there's some nuance here. And sometimes we forget these things. And sometimes if we've been programmed to be predisposed to people-pleasing and approval-seeking behavior because of an early childhood relationship with a primary caregiver, those dynamics play out in our adult relationships. And it could be a relationship with an employer. It could be a relationship with a business partner. It could be a long-term love relationship or a marriage. It doesn't matter what kind of relationship. We can still play out those same dynamics that were conditioned in us from an early childhood caregiver, especially around people-pleasing, especially around approval-seeking. And approval is not love, right? Approval is not love. It's conditional love, but that's not love. Approval is the kind of love that says, I will love you if you do this, if you satisfy me, if you please me. And in a relationship or a dynamic where the love is contingent on your behavior, that's not unconditional. Okay? And Venus conjoining the South Node is asking us to check our motivations, asking us to be motivated by unconditional love and to be motivated towards unconditional love. Are you coming from a place of unconditional love? Or are you coming from a place of, oh, excuse me, that's my meditation alarm. It's not going to happen because I'm not going to be done in 5 minutes. It's asking us to be cognizant of our motivations and cognizant of what we're moving towards. And sometimes it can indicate where we've outgrown a relationship. Okay? And if you've outgrown a relationship, it's okay to walk away. It's okay to walk away. It doesn't mean you don't love a person, but it does mean that you are allowed to have boundaries. Okay. Now, also coming up in January, we have a lot of Mercury-related astrological activity. We have a conjunction to Pluto just as Mercury enters Capricorn on the 4th. That conjunction to Pluto speaks to a profoundly transformative transit of Capricorn for Mercury. There's this tiny little piece of dust that keeps floating in front of the camera. You can probably see it. It's driving me crazy. We have Mercury squaring Mars and then trining Venus right after he makes that shift. Those happen on January 9th. On the 10th, he's going to conjoin Saturn. On the 11th, he's going to conjoin Jupiter. On the 12th, he's going to square Uranus. And then on the 13th, we get into the new moon in Sagittarius when Mars is going to square Saturn. So this is a lot of Mercury heavy activity early in the month of January. And what that speaks to is those of you who have Gemini sun or Gemini rising or Virgo sun or Virgo rising, you're going to be feeling these transits pretty heavily. And what I want to do really quick is just kind of run through January from the zoomed out perspective in terms of our conversation about conjunctions and the fact that they signify the ending of a cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. January is a month of transition and shift as many of these cycles close and then open into new cycles. We have a lot of conjunction activity in January, and it's not often that we would have a month this heavy. And keep in mind, we're coming off the great conjunction that we just had barely a week ago. And so all of that is going to inform how we experience this month coming forward. And what I would encourage you to do is maybe mark in your calendar these dates when these conjunctions are going to happen, and pay attention to what activities arise and what themes are activated for you in terms of closure, but also in terms of new opportunity and the new cycles that will begin unfolding in January and continue to play out for a year, if not perhaps longer in some cases. And especially this is relevant when we're talking about the personal planets, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, but also it can be relevant when we're talking about the longer term transits. So January 5th, we have Mercury conjoining Pluto. We have on the 10th, Mercury conjoining Saturn, as we just said. And on the 11th, then he conjoins Jupiter. On the 14th, we have the Sun conjoining Pluto. That typically happens once a year. We have Mars conjoining Uranus on the 20th of January. We have the Sun conjoining Saturn on the 24th, and then Jupiter the 29th, and then finally Venus conjoining Pluto on the 28th. All of these are important. All of these are relevant. Now, looking ahead, beyond the coming 2 weeks, we're going to be moving into, we have, of course, the new moon in Sagittarius on the 13th of January when Mars is squaring Saturn. And then on the 14th, we're going to have the Sun. This is a big day, the 14th. Sun conjoining Pluto, entering Capricorn. Uranus will station at the same time he trines Venus. So that's a busy, busy day, astrologically speaking, and it's hot on the heels of our new moon in Sagittarius. And then on the 15th, the very next day, Mercury is going to enter his retrograde shadow. But we're going to talk about all that on the next Sidereal Insights Astro update, not this one. And that brings me to some important announcements. So don't hop off just yet. There's some things kind of cooking in the works, some changes coming, and I want to make sure that you know about them. Especially because I don't have all the details for you yet. So I want to invite you to kind of stay tuned for more information. So a couple of things. We're nearly completed with the Ultimate Astrological Planner for 2021. So hold tight. It's coming, I promise. It's been a crazy year to try to put that together and get it ready for you in a timely fashion. And I do apologize for that. I know there are many of you who are waiting for your planners. Hold tight. Thank you so much for your patience. They are coming. And it's important to me to have them be accurate and fully ready and fully complete for you. But they're coming. The other thing that I want to bring up for you is that I'm kind of reformatting how I offer this information to you for 2021. I'm kind of reimagining what does this delivery look like in terms of the Sidereal Insights Astro Update, which we normally do every 2 weeks, and the lunar live streams, which happen just ahead of the new and full moons, where we do our guided intention setting and our guided releasing practices. And what you're seeing, especially on a day like today, we're going to have 2 broadcasts in one day. We have the Astro Update early in the day, and then at 7:30 Mountain Time this evening, we're supposed to be having our full moon releasing practice coming up. And that's a lot to have on one day. And so what I'm trying to do is reimagine what this schedule might look like if I were to bring you one broadcast every week rather than have these periods of time during the year where they stack right up on top of each other. Because of course, every other Monday is one thing, right? That's a fixed schedule. But the full moon and the new moon move forward in the month by one day every month as we move throughout the year, right? They're not static on specific days of the month, and it just has to do with the nature of the lunar cycles, right? And so what we end up with, a period of time every year where we have both the Astro update and a lunar broadcast happening on the same day or within a day of each other. And what I would like to do is restructure that so that you're getting a broadcast every week rather than having these gaps of 2 weeks with nothing and then a whole bunch all at once during certain times of the year, right? I haven't figured out exactly what that kind of a broadcast schedule would look like. So stay tuned. I'm working on it tentatively. The next one will be, let's have a look at a calendar. Tentatively, the next broadcast would be January 11th for the Sidereal Insights Astro update. And what I just want to say is hold tight because that could change. For now, plan for it to be Monday 2 weeks from now, but that may change, and I'll let you know as I get this new broadcast schedule kind of ironed out and figured out what does it look like. Now, a couple other things that are new to the mix. Just in case this is more your style, I have recently launched a podcast, a Mystick Physick Astrology podcast that's available on a number of podcasting platforms now. So if you'd rather listen to these broadcasts than have to sit through a video, you can do that. You can listen to them on your favorite podcasting platform, and you can download the podcasts as well. So that's a new feature, and I'm excited to announce that. I've gotten a lot of good feedback from many of you that you prefer the podcast format, and that is fine. That is wonderful. The other thing that's going to be changing coming into 2021 is that I am moving all the membership goodies that we used to have available on the Mystick Physick Astrology website to a Patreon as a platform. Part of the reason for that is that the tools that I had been using to make that available to you on the website are no longer being supported by their developers, and it's made it a headache and a hassle, and it makes it so that I can't offer you the membership content in the way that I had wanted to, in the way that I had envisioned being able to offer it to you. So all of that is moving off of the website, moving on to Patreon. I haven't decided when to officially launch the Patreon membership, although it's available on Patreon right now. If you head over there, patreon.com/mystickphysick or Mystick Physick Astrology, I forget which one it is. You can sign up right now. There's 3 different membership tiers. The lowest one is only $3.33 a month. I chose that price point because anything less than $3 and a larger percentage of your contribution goes towards payment processing fees. And I'm sure that if you're wanting to support the broadcast, you want more of your contribution to go towards these broadcasts. And so you can subscribe to the Patreon feed for as little as $3.33 a month. There are some other higher tiers where you get some more bonus material and goodies. Part of what I'll be doing with the Patreon content is giving it to you ahead of time. So of course, the new moon and the full moon broadcasts, I typically like to have them available for the general public on the new moon and the full moon. You'll get access to them up to 2 days ahead of time if you're a subscriber to Patreon. And then same thing with the Sidereal Insights Astro updates as I figure out exactly what that broadcast schedule looks like. If you're a Patreon subscriber, you're going to get advanced access to that content. And also in all of those cases, you'll be able to interact with me live during the broadcast. And so if you're just waiting for the YouTube videos to be posted or just waiting to get access to the videos here on Facebook, you're not going to have that ability to interact with me live going forward. Now, I'm not 100% sure exactly when I'll kick that off and launch it as the main launch just yet. I will let you know when that's going to happen. And if you'd want to just head on over to Patreon and sign up now and help support the broadcasts and support what we're doing in that way, feel free to go ahead and sign up now and just stay tuned. I'll have a full launch announcement for you at some point later on down the road, but I want to make sure that we get the Ultimate Astrological Planner out and available first. And so that's my main priority. I want to thank everyone for watching today. Sorry about the technical issues at the start of the first broadcast where we had no sign or sound. I apologize for that. But thank you for coming back and joining me, Dylan. It was good to see you. And we'll see you all again next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.